Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this Mobile World Live webinar. Um, the title of today's session is 5G NTN Integration, How Hybrid Networks Unlock Growth Opportunities. And it's sponsored by ST Engineering iDirect. My name's Tim Green. I'm a part of the Mobile World Live team, and I'm very happy to be moderating today's session. Just a few notes before we get cracking. The length of today's session will be around 45 to 50 minutes long. We'd like to hear from you during the session. There's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and you can ask questions at any time. And we'll be answering as many of those as we can at the end of the session. We'll also be giving details on how to watch again or share with colleagues. And in fact, when you do get to watch the recorded session, there will be a resources tab on the screen where you can download the slides that feature in today's webinar. Okay, so on to today's topic of 5G NTN integration. Now, when it comes to network building, the world's MNOs all share the same fundamental goals. Essentially, they want to overcome coverage gaps, make networks more resilient, and unlock new revenue streams. And converging terrestrial and satellite networks through 5G NTNs offers a compelling strategy for achieving these aims. And the good news is that this is no longer a vision, it's actually a reality. However, convergence is complex and it requires a strategic standards-based approach underpinned by innovative ground network systems. So in this webinar, we'll explore a way forward and we'll discuss the benefits of a hybrid integration strategy that leverages existing SATCOM infrastructure investments with 5G core access. We'll look at how advanced ground systems can be critical enablers, and we'll explore how the convergence of 3GPP-TN, NTN, and non-3GPP networks can create a unified ecosystem for new roaming and enterprise services. So first we'll hear from Shiv Pucha. He's the Director of Research and Consulting at GSMA Intelligence. And Shiv will present a short overview of the global 5G and NTN landscape. And then we'll dive into the main topic. And to do this, we'll be joined by Brian Jakins. He's the VP of Global Sales and Marketing Development at ST Engineering iDirect. And Shravan Gadam, he's the VP and Senior Fellow of Engineering at STN Engineering iDirect. So first, let's hand over to Shiv for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And a very good day to everyone who's tuned into this webinar. My name is Shiv again, and I'm a Director of Research and Consulting with GSMA Intelligence. So it's a great privilege for me to be able to share a few quick sort of bits of research insights with all of you. So let's get right into it. And the topic, of course, is 5G and NTN integration. But, so it's a very exciting time to be in the NTN space. And compared to sort of 2020, roughly when, let's say, the big sort of thing happened with low Earth orbit constellations going up, we're seeing tremendous growth in this area. And pretty much by the end of this decade, that we project that that'll grow about 10 times. Which then numbers, tens of thousands of satellites up. So this is the big sort of change that's happening. And this is being driven by, a bunch of things, different factors, improved sort of economics for satellite, much, better performance, but also growing demand from the telco operator community who are very keenly looking at ways to plug gaps in coverage and create new services. Now, of course, there's a range of use cases for this. Consumers, individuals, households, roaming emergency service, but also a lot of enterprise kind of use cases with IoT and industrial use cases that are coming up. And there's also a fair, look in many countries at ways to use this for emergency and disaster response. So we kind of have an idea of how many satellites will go up in, the next few years. But how does this translate, on the ground in terms of footprint? So as of August 2025, GSMA Intelligence, we're tracking about 110 operators who have made announcements in this regard. Now, just under 30 are currently live, and the rest are either in testing or planning stages. But in terms of actual footprint on the ground, this already covers about 2/3 of, all connections out there, which is just a shade under 6 billion. Now, of course, this number is, more than likely a little skewed by large markets like India and China. But if you look regionally, there are a lot of operators who are active in this space. The sort of most of them, the biggest chunk is coming from Asia Pacific with 45, and that's cutting across a lot of different countries and operator groups. By comparison, if you look at sort of Europe, which has an equally large number of markets and operators and sort of diversity there, that's a bit lower at like 12, but it's growing fast. The space is growing very fast. But with all of this, there's more and more focus now around sort of this theme of integration of 5G with NTN. Now, 5G is widely deployed, but it's not going to cover all geographies, and cover all scenarios. And this is where NTN and satellite coverage makes a big deal. But what is the push for? Where's the interest coming from in terms of integration? For one thing, of course, it delivers a much greater addressable market. A lot of industry verticals, who used to use satellite for backhaul, perhaps only can now look at several use cases, IoT and others. That's a much bigger opportunity. Operators themselves, can of course target consumer, but also tap into enterprise users and different scenarios. On the roadmap side, we already have a pretty large sort of base of providers, with VSAT and stuff, but they're looking at how to leverage 5G to go beyond. You're also seeing a lot of direct-to-cell or direct-to-device announcements, starting, of course, with messaging, but pushing towards voice calling as well. You've got operators also thinking about sort of ways to build, resiliency into their network, deal with sort of disaster recovery and other scenarios. On the standard side, there's a lot of movement on the 3GPP side, and with standards bodies sort of actively looking at the convergence or integration. But there is technology available today already, that can deliver some of this integration. But I'll talk about that a little more. And of course, operators ultimately are looking at, how do they deliver a truly seamless coverage across that, the full coverage scenarios, basically. But just want to deep dive, I'll dive a little, into one of the things I talked about, which is what happens with the pretty large already base of installed, with the large installed base already. So that we estimate about 6 million VSAT terminals already deployed. That's a large number, cutting across several industries and use cases. But these all come from different providers, each with sort of different proprietary systems, which also means they're not really interoperable. But today, if you look at the example shown here, on the right, through gateway functions, these installed, these legacy devices can already be abstracted onto a 5G core through, gateways that are installed at the teleports or ground stations, and from there, connections can be made to the 5G core. So these can be managed, provisioned, and so on already, and there's more technology and different options coming, of course. Ultimately, if you think about the future, we are looking at a converged scenario that covers, that basically delivers a multi-layered network cutting across terrestrial, apps, satellite, and so on. Many operators, like SoftBank, have made announcements about this already. All of this will be based on, evolving 3GPP standards. But this has certain implications, and I want to leave you with two thoughts. Number one, this multi-layered network would need hybrid devices, that can deal with all modes, communicate across all modes. And that requires support from the chipset level up through the stack. But also, depending on which scenario, so which satellite constellation at which orbit, connecting, with which particular operators, terrestrial networks, and other you need roaming across all of these networks. And that kind of true hybrid roaming will be, critical for this sort of future scenario. And now with that, I want to end here and hand it back because there's a lot of great content to come. So thank you again for the opportunity. And Tim, I want to hand it back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Shiv. So that's a good overview to start. So we've kind of got a big picture there, and let's continue with that big picture focus. So I think, Shiv, you mentioned 110 telcos active, and you mentioned SoftBank's announcement recently. So this convergence of terrestrial and satellite networks seems to be now a realistic option, a real thing. So what's changed? What's made that happen? Maybe Shravan, you can start there.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar. So I would say a lot of things have changed in the past few years, especially to make this convergence a realistic option. I mean, let's start with the evolution of the standards. The way the 3GPP releases 17 and 18, they formalized the whole NTN support, which actually created a global framework for integrating the satellite with 5G systems, especially addressing the challenges that we have seen in the legacy world with the Doppler shifts and the propagation delays. And then there is the market timing. For example, most of the legacy satellite constellations are being retired now. And as they launch the new ones, I mean, operators are actually looking into as an inflection point to deploy the next generation and 5G native network architectures from the ground up. And then I would say one of the other drivers is the technology shift with the evolution of the 5G and 6G, which is driving this convergence, where it uses common standards. I would say the cloud native architectures, the common orchestration, which enables a seamless integration. And all of this is happening because the industry is moving towards a full network virtualization to replace the bespoke hardware. And I would say even the other one is a multi-vendor ecosystem and the interoperability. I mean, that is also driving this convergence where most of the vendors would want to work with each other, and they also want to open the interfaces between them so that the operators could go to any of the vendors and they could replace depending on the performance. And that's where it's very critical for all the network elements like what we see in the native 5G core or the radio access network and the radios itself. They're all being standardized as part of the NTN standardization in the specifications that are coming up. And finally, the ground segment evolution. For example, I mean, the advanced ground systems like what STI engineering platform, the Intuition, we are building that to be a completely cloud native and 5G ready, I would say. And that way it enables to manage traffic across different orbits, the LEO, MEO, and GEO constellations. So I would say, all these things put together is what is actually driving this convergence state where we are today. And I would say from the timing perspective, that's very critical where we would want to go towards this convergence and work with MNOs and SNOs.
And Shiv, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Shravan talked about in detail about some of the many things that are coming together, and that's great. But just if you want to take a step back, I would also think we are living in it's a much used term in this sort of digital age, and that kind of implies full connectivity everywhere. And I think for the first time, the industry is really not just the industry, governments too. We're also living in this now age of AI, and all of this. I still feel like we're at the just barely at the end of the beginning, so to speak. But there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of these gaps. It's not just when you drive down the road and you got to go out of coverage, but also indoors. There are so many sort of things that have to be addressed, and I think this is the right time that the industry is finally sort of all stakeholders coming together to address these gaps and provide that true sort of for it to be truly digital, you need to be connected all the time, and it's a very exciting time from that point of view with everything coming together.
Yeah, well, Shravan talked about some of the technical details and standards required and so on, interoperability. We're going to come back to that, but let's stick with the business drivers for now. So obviously, there's always business drivers driving these kinds of big industry shifts. The big one is one of them is obviously coverage. So Brian, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So first, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm actually down in Cape Town currently and going through MWC and listening to all the telcos and the satellite guys and what's new. So when we talk about ubiquitous coverage that Shiv mentioned, up until now, I think it's been a bit of a vision. But when we look at the convergence that Shravan was talking about, this is the primary driver is to extend 5G beyond what we see from a terrestrial perspective, where terrestrial infrastructure can reach only so far. And how do we extend beyond those borders? So this is really to connect remote and rural areas. And, for many years, it's always been about connecting and, let's say, reducing or closing the digital divide that we've seen. Part of one of the keynote addresses yesterday that I saw was just looking over some of the developing markets and how we connect schools in rural areas that do not have terrestrial coverage. And, satellite is really prime for that. So global reach, connecting these remote areas, looking at it from a mobility perspective, providing seamless connectivity for aviation, which has been a big thing lately. I mean, we all seem to travel on planes lately. It's been, to get to some of these events, to get to family, to get home, travel, air travel has picked up quite significantly. And we all try and connect, and we all get a bit frustrated with the connectivity that we experience on those planes. So satellite is really primed for that. And more so recently, when we talk about the LEO providers providing low Earth orbit connectivity. But this is also available for enterprise customers in areas where terrestrial build-out is very expensive and may be logistically difficult. We talk about, again, closing the digital divide, but what does that take in today's environment? How do we strap on antennas or VSATs and go into these rural areas and provide that sort of connectivity that we so desire? Operators can achieve a faster time to market by leveraging satellite partners for instant coverage as they potentially build out some of that infrastructure, or they might just stick with the satellite connectivity. As we've seen, it's become more reliable. It's now open standards. As we move into a 5G environment, we're going to be able to connect many devices based on the standards. So telcos are more embracing of what 5G brings to them today, and that's why they're integrating, let's say, non-terrestrial means, whether it be HAPS, whether it be drones, or LEO satellites, and all the way up into geo satellites. And then the last part, I would say, it's really extending the coverage of telcos and service providers to be able to roam freely between non-3GPP and 3GPP non-terrestrial networks, and then terrestrial networks. So it's really about expanding your coverage and making sure that you can reach as far beyond where the terrestrial networks can reach today.
Great. Okay. So obviously, socially, and I know GSMA is very engaged with this process of connecting the unconnected. That's a good thing in itself. But, clearly we need to use that extended coverage to open up new revenue streams. So, Brian, can you give us your thoughts on how these converged networks that extend into new areas can open up these new revenue streams?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's potentially a couple of areas that we could look at for that. I mean, with the amount of capacity that we have in the sky now, idle satellite capacity can be monetized as wholesale bandwidth for roaming partners, increasing fall rates, generating new business-to-business revenue. A home operator could be providing an overlay coverage to a visiting MNO. So think about when GSM first started up and we had a visiting gateway and we provided roaming from that perspective, that you could roam into somebody else's network. It's very much the same from a satellite perspective. And then some of the advancement in terms of service level agreements, I think that we see from a satellite point of view, there's specific services that are provided from a financial services perspective, or it might be critical communications. And these have requirements for a specific uptime or availability. So you can provide guaranteed SLAs through network slicing. This is made possible now through standards-based 3GPP, providing these standards-based that everybody would operate through. And this would provide the opportunity to do this. Converged infrastructure, which supports differentiated pricing for government and enterprise customers. And then security on your network as well. So these are high priority slices. So that's one way to monetize. And then improved utilization through shared infrastructure, which would increase your return on investment on expensive network assets. And this supports new business models. So including what we traditionally know as pay-as-you-grow connectivity, where we also look at seasonal coverage, and you see that specifically in the cruise market, where there's seasonal demand. And then also areas for agricultural harvest or disaster response. And, we have this big drive in terms of how do we lower, the Earth's temperatures, and how do we go green, and how do we contribute to the environment. And we look at the impact that some of the hurricanes have over some of the remote areas, or even, you see this in the US quite often. And providing that sort of disaster recovery is one of those key areas for monetization.
Yeah, thank you. So extending coverage into new areas is one dimension of this. I think the other one is network resilience, ensuring that networks stay live in all circumstances. Shravan, can you talk to the impact of convergence on network resilience?
Sure, yeah. So I would say by creating a network of networks, I mean, that's what the satellite actually provides, an inherent backup layer, right? And the other thing is the automatic and seamless switching with the networks being converged, and the hybrid architectures that iDirect is building on the Intuition platform. I mean, that would help where we could have a policy-driven failovers between the heterogeneous networks, whether it's terrestrial, satellite, and the partner networks. So that's where the seamless switching would be enabled. And the satellite networks, they could also provide, I would say, the multiple and alternate backhauls paths for the MNOs, where it would actually strengthen the whole resilience of the core network infrastructure of the MNOs. And then I would say by combining the two distinct network types, the terrestrial networks and the satellite networks, what we're providing is a more reliable and robust system where you could reach out. I think we already covered about the underused and remote areas, where or even in terms of any disaster recovery, everything else, where each individual network supporting what they could achieve. When you combine these two things, we are actually making it, I would say, the double the reliability from the network resilience perspective. And finally, maybe I would say even the path diversity, right? I mean, if one link is compromised, I mean, now we have the multi-orbits and multi-satellites and the constellations where we could actually reroute all the traffic, which enables the high availability, especially for the critical and the emergency services.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And finally, so let's, Brian, bring you back in. You talked a lot about new revenue opportunities. What about cost savings? Can you talk a little bit about how shared infrastructure can open up OpEx savings for networks?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Shravan mentioned two of them, by creating a network of networks, we provide, or satellites provide, an inherent backup layer. And then, I think everybody's talking about multi-orbit connectivity, and where you have best effort services in one area and this fails, can you fall over to something else, and how quickly do you switch into that environment? So that offers a path of diversity. Looking at unification under a single 5G core, which enables, consolidated identity management, charging policy control. These are all specific elements, reducing the number of backup office systems, streamlining support processes. So shared infrastructure is not, it's new when we look at how we do hybrid roaming and being able to roam into a 5G core. The telcos have been doing this for some time, looking at how they share infrastructure to reduce their OpEx. And operators can extend the life of existing investments by, reusing normal satellite DVBX, S2X, MXDMA, MRC, and I'm cotton in these phrases, but this is the efficiency protocols, or the wave form that drives the efficiency from a satellite perspective, which is still very efficient in comparison to what we're doing from a 5G perspective, but also allows, it benefits from the 5G core advantages without the mandatory upgrades. So there's a big saving from an OpEx perspective in terms of how you need to invest in that infrastructure while sweating some of the assets that you've invested in over a period of time. So I think that we will see significant OpEx savings in the future by adopting that model.
Great, thanks. Okay, so let's go deeper into the area of hybrid roaming. And I can bring Shrav back for this one. What does it look like in practice for MNOs? Can you explain how iDirect's own cloud native multi-orbit ground segment architecture helps.
Sure. Yeah. So before I go into how exactly it's getting into the practice for MNOs, Tim, maybe what we are doing at iDirect, instead of getting into the full-fledged 5G NTN system or the hybrid network straight away, I think the idea what we have developed is to come up with 3 pillars to enable this journey for us. I mean, the first one being the non-3GPP access, which enables the existing satellite networks or the legacy terminals to access it to 5G code. What Shiva's mentioned in the beginning from the GSMA perspective, that's exactly what we are trying to do over here is how could we secure investments for the existing satellite customers. So we would want to provide an access for the legacy terminals into the 5G infrastructure. So that's where we would want to start with, because that is what the operators have today, and they do not have to lift the whole infrastructure all the way on day one itself. So that's where we're starting with the pillar 1, which is a non-3GPP access. And then we would want to get into the full 3GPP access into the 5G core. Essentially, this is where it comes up into the G node B, the radio access network aspect of it. And finally, we would want to get into the hybrid roaming, where we would think that the ecosystem would be ready. In one of the points what she was mentioning, which is very critical, is the chipsets enabling that. And we would want to build the hybrid modems and then getting into the network where users could seamlessly move across different networks. Now, when we put this into our Intuition platform, so Intuition platform, as we mentioned, it's a completely cloud native, disaggregated architecture that we use, the microservice based architecture and the common NMS and orchestration part of it. So that platform is going to be a common platform for us, and then which would be able to support multi-orbits on top of it, whether it's LEO, GEO, MEOs. And then we would like to bring in the 3 pillars into it. As you see, the network processing clusters and the broadband processing clusters, that's where we would be having our components coming in depending on the pillar that we would want to go with. So to start with, for the pillar 1, what we have developed is a satellite interworking gateway that would actually act as a bridge from legacy terminals into the 5G infra. Now, what does it mean for existing satellite terminals? They don't have to change the modems. They just have to get into the satellite networking gateway that we're going to provide, and then get the services of the 5G infra side of it. So no heavy lifting needed on day one. And then as a gradual transition, you go into the 5G NTN, where we would bring up the G node B into the systems. And by then we have the 5G chipsets coming up and the 5G UE ecosystem getting ready. And finally, the third process is where we were going to build the hybrid modems, which would be supporting both the DVB-S2X and the 5G NTN waveforms, getting into the network where seamlessly the users could move across the hybrid networks. And that's where, if you go to the next slide, we show that where the roaming, which what we talked about, is the essential thing, where we could roam across non-3GPP networks. Now, this is very critical, and if we have seen the recent announcement between JSAT and KTSAT, right, and they are 2 legacy networks, and they have signed up agreement where they would want to roam across 5G NTN networks. Now, it does not stop them from even roaming across their existing networks by having the satellite interworking gateway and leveraging the 5G core functionality from the roaming perspective. So we could support the roaming across non-3GPP networks or across 2 5G networks, and we could also do the heterogeneous networks between non-3GPP and the 5G networks, and finally the MNOs, which we're talking about the roaming across even terrestrial networks. So this is what our Intuition platform is being built, and where we would want as a gradual transition. As I said, we do not want to wait for the next 2 to 3 years and come into the market saying that, okay, now we have a solution. But we would want to take our customers right from day one, walk them through this phase 1 or the pillar 1, I would say, from the non-3GPP access all the way to the hybrid networks. And as you see over here, we just wanted to visualize the way the network of networks is built across multi-orbits and multi-access. So that's where iDirect Intuition platform is going to play a critical role to support multi-access and multi-orbit solutions, where it could be in terms of the aviation, or it could be maritime, where people could be roaming, or the terminals could be roaming across different networks. And that is a perfect thing where we are trying to build, starting off with a non-3GPP and ending up into the hybrid network. Now, how does this look like in terms of MNOs? As I said, the operators agreements, they we talk about whether it is the satellite network operators or even MNOs and the satellite network operators, and we could be the bridge as bringing all these parties together by having the solution being built on the platform, which is our cloud native Intuition. So I would say this is a journey which will be starting now, and then maybe by the time the next set of satellites that are being launched, and that's exactly where we would be there in terms of hybrid architectures.
Okay, that's a great introduction. Shiv, maybe I'll bring you back in. How does hybrid roaming open up new business models, particularly thinking about service continuity? What might be the impact there?
I think the impact is significant, but it does obviously depend on different use cases and different industries and what you're trying to sort of.
I'm not sure if anyone else
match.
is getting the same distortion on your voice.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of distortion there.
Yeah. Maybe while you're sorting that out, I'll ask Brian if he can talk to that service continuity topic.
Well, I can't answer for sure, but I'll give you my version. So, look, I think, we were talking about, when you look at the multi-orbit environment, it's no longer just multi-orbit when we talk, everybody goes, GEO, MEO, LEO, but there's higher LEO, lower LEO, and then ultra-low LEO. So we really need to look at how we embrace partnerships. So, there's a couple of areas I think that we can focus on. When you look at wholesale capacity, satellite operators can sell overlays to MNOs, allowing them, to provide guaranteed service continuity with robust service level agreements. MNOs can expand their footprint without a significant capex uplift. So those are pretty key for them, I think, and they need to have a partnership with those satellite operators to be able to explore that. And then the biggest one is probably faster time to coverage. We all want to bridge the digital divide. We all want to provide the coverage, extend beyond what terrestrial can do, and they can MNOs can instantly extend those services to new regions by partnering with satellite operators that already have coverage, rather than building out terrestrial infrastructure. When we look at the partner marketplace, we're looking at creating an ecosystem where MNOs and satellite operators can easily partner to combine terrestrial and non-terrestrial assets, creating new service offerings for end customers. So it's important. I mean, our CEO has been on a few discussions where he's spoken about, how we need to partner to accelerate, and not everybody building out their own infrastructure that is unique to themselves, but collaborating and providing this hybrid model. And this, we have this view of creating a stronger together ecosystem, which encourages, multi-operators and multi-orbit collaborations.
I'm not sure, Shiv, whether you're still going to sound like a robot when we ask you, but we can try.
Sorry, if this is any better, I'll give it a shot.
Not really.
No,
right now.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll have to try and get you to disconnect your microphone or something and just speak directly to your laptop or something. Anyway, while we wait and see if we can get you sorted out, Brian, what about roaming agreements between telco and satellite operators? Can you talk about how this might have an impact there?
Yeah, I think this will become much more sophisticated. As we look at, it won't just be about access anymore. And I think it's going to really be about quality of service, defining performance levels, how they look at network slicing, allocating virtual network resources for specific enterprise customers, government customers, unified security, ensuring consistent security policies are enforced across networks. And then you bring in the dimension of multi-orbit. So whether it's a MEO, a GEO, a LEO, what part of LEO, so that's going to bring a completely different dimension to those agreements. And then we need to look at, the most important part is, how do you charge for it? We've all been in satellite for many, many years, and we've spoken from a GEO. MEO has been around for some time. OneWeb started really back in 2012, and they really started going, with the launches in 2019. But this is a new dimension in terms of contributing to non-terrestrial networks. So, how do we charge for that, which is probably key to these agreements. We think that, or I think that the telco, contracts will shift from focusing just on data and voice rates to multi-domain SLAs, which specify the quality of service, the latency, the security policies for integrated terrestrial and satellite traffic, which is a completely different dimension. And then it's about APIs and standardization, 3GPP, what that standardization brings to those agreements, which will obviously drive easier integration and support, near real-time charging, which is key for the telcos. So it's going to get more complicated. It's going to be an exciting period. I think Shiv said, right at the beginning, we're living in exciting times in terms of what's available from a non-terrestrial perspective. But we need to find a way to create harmonized processes where we have fewer billing disputes, where the customer knows what he's getting, where the service provider, the telco, integrated into that partnership with the satellite provider, is able to deliver a service that's expected and can be measured and can be charged for. So those I think, are going to be key drivers in terms of what we see shifting from those agreements going forward.
Great. Okay. Well, before we sort of dive deeper into the practicalities of integrating these hybrid networks, just finally, Brian, we're going to assume that hybrid roaming is going to boost coverage and revenue. So how might that unlock new vertical markets for telcos?
Yeah, I spoke about it a bit earlier. Operators would achieve instant ubiquitous reach, by combining satellite partners' footprints and allowing full, national or continental coverage without waiting for a terrestrial build-out. Wholesale revenue would increase as home networks monetize underutilized capacity. Traditional fill rates on some of these satellites have been 60 to 70%. So there would be significant improvements on that, especially relevant to, satellite operators that have spare bandwidth, because we're all looking at, how do we monetize those investments and sweat those assets for, particularly for the satellite operators. And then, premium connectivity normally attracts, enterprise clients needing business critical links. We talk about disaster recovery, we talk about financial services, how these can't really be cloud-based based on, the secure communications or where the data traffic sits or resides or lands. And then obviously where we look at, disaster recovery and emergency response services. So those are some of the key areas, I think, when we look at, I think that hybrid roaming is obviously going to facilitate rapid scaling. And then new market entrants can go live by leveraging these established networks that have been built out, that have been established already without, investing significant monies in that in the future. So I think those are the key areas.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So let's get into the practicalities of integrating these hybrid 5G NTNs. Shravan, what do engineers need to know about iDirect's 5G Core Ready Ground System?
Sure.
I think it's called.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, as I was mentioning when I was going deep into the hybrid architecture, so our Intuition platform, as I said, it is a cloud-native platform, and which means it's all our software defined and disaggregated with microservices-based architecture, and that's what we've been building, and we would want to stay aligned with the market, and so that when we try to go out and work, deploy it in a different environments, and then we do not have to go back and then reinvent everything from scratch. So that way we have designed in a way that it could fit into all the markets, and especially when we get into the telco side of it, the integration, and we know how the telco industry has evolved and how it's advanced compared to the satellite networks when it comes to the platforms. So we would want to build in a way that it closely synergizes and converges into what exactly the telco markets are going after and how the telco markets are built. So that is more on the platform side of it. And then the next one, as I said, our eventual goal is from the hybrid architectures. That means we need to support both the legacy and the new waveforms. So that is what I think the market knows that where iDirect is in terms of the legacy waveforms. We've been in that industry for more than 3 decades. So we have our own the MRC waveforms that we support, and with more efficiencies and more, I would say, the performance metrics. And now we're getting to the NTN waveforms. So our platform is designed to support both the waveforms. And similarly, when we go into the I would say, the terminal side of it. That's what we are trying to build, where we would want to have the roaming across all the networks. And where we are with respect to, I guess, from the engineering point of view, is we have already have as I mentioned, the satellite interworking gateway, which would allow all the legacy operators getting into the 5G infra, and we are working from the G Node B perspective. And in fact, some of the news will be coming out soon with respect to our partnerships, where we are with respect to building a G Node B, and that the work that we already underway, I would say, coming up with better results in terms of the G Node B NTN solution, and also in terms of the hybrid UE side of it. There's significant progress that we are working with some of the chipset vendors that would actually lay a path for us to build the hybrid modems. So I would say, overall, I think from the architecture perspective and what we're trying to do from the platform side of it, so that we support multiple waveforms. And more important is when we go, especially from the convergence perspective, the telcos and the SMOs, they have different NMS and OSS systems. So what we're trying to do is build a unified NMS, which would be consistent from the billing perspective, where we could get the information, or even if you want to get the 5G core and our components. When I'm saying ours, it's more of the satellite-based components, but everything would be converged, and that way would have a unified NMS. And the critical aspect over there is not only the NMS perspective from the configuration side, but also from the global bandwidth management perspective, which in the telco world, it's referred as, how you wanted to do the policy-driven things using the RIC. I think that is equivalent of what we're trying to do as part of a global bandwidth management. So these are all the good things that our platform is supporting, and which would be, as I said, the imminent news that's going to come out is about a partnership from the G Node B side of it.
And can you briefly talk about what's needed to comply with industry standards and interoperability for these hybrid networks?
Sure. I think the first and foremost is, comply to the standards. I don't think there's an excuse for anybody else. Especially with all the specifications coming up, the release 17, 18, and going forward, all the things that these specifications are coming up to solve the issues. I don't think there's any other option other than supporting all the specifications. And then I would say, stay ahead of all the standards, and whether it's TM Forum and MEF, which is again the point goes back to NMS and OSS, which I was mentioning. So I think complying to that is very critical. And since it's a multi-vendor ecosystem that we are trying to go and get into the world outside, comply to the specifications as much as possible. Don't deviate. And I think the proprietary or the custom hardware or having that incumbency, I don't think that's going to be working out, especially with all the vertically integrated operators coming up. I think it's better to go collaborate and build that ecosystem among the satellite network operators and among the vendors, and that is possible only when you comply to the specifications, whether it is 3GPP or whether it is ORAN or whether it's TN Forum and MEF.
Okay, great. Before we move on to audience questions, let's just have a kind of overall takeaway from Brian. So just summarize what MNOs need to do to collaborate with satellite providers to build scalable, profitable use cases in this space.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's already happening. It starts with a strategic dialogue, I guess, and they need to, engage with ecosystem partners early enough to define what that hybrid connectivity looks like to them. They would need to choose partners whose ground systems are flexible and can adapt as technology evolves. I think Shravan's given a good overview of what we have from an intuition perspective. And then it's important to demand that interoperability, because you need to have partners whose ground systems enable the seamless mobility between non-3GPP and 5G and non-terrestrial networks with 3G compliant quality of service and backend integration. So I think those are two of the key areas. And then the satellite operators and the telcos. Well, the telcos need to define their go-to-market requirements, evaluate their service differentiation, choose their partners that offer these flexible business models that can evolve. This could easily start with wholesale capacity agreements to grow into deeper co-branding service partnerships, we've seen some of it already, so it's already happening. And when you go to any of these that were traditionally telco shows, MWC, whatever they are, there's a large satellite component already a part of that. So I think that they don't have to do everything all at once. Everybody looks at this as complicated. It looks, expensive. If they build incrementally, start with a foundational use case like enterprise service continuity or backhaul, and build on that success, expand into more complex applications like mobility or network slicing for government clients or financial services and so forth. So, if they embrace that, I think that, they're well on track to get those partnerships and to be able to build scalability.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So we've got just a few minutes for questions. We've got quite a lot of questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to get through them all, but let's see how we get on. So I think, Shravan, this will probably be a question for you. Why did iDirect prioritize proving non-3GPP interworking to the 5G core as the first proof of concept? And how far along are you with productizing a satellite optimized G-Node 8 or G-Node B, for 5G NR over NTN?
Yeah, no, I think I've addressed some of these things earlier, Tim. So I think the main focus for us to go into the non-3GPP access is to secure investments for our existing customers. That's one reason. And then the other thing is definitely we would want them to be part of the journey right from day one, rather than waiting for 2 or 3 years and getting into the hybrid networks right away. So that way they would not be an heavy lifting at the towards the end, but it's a gradual transition, I would say, as a journey where we would want to leverage what the terminals are there out from the satellite perspective. So don't have to change the modems, don't have to do anything else. That's more of securing the investments part of it. And the second part, where we are, as I said, we are already working with our G-Node partners. So we, as I said, the news will be coming out pretty soon. And in fact, we are I would say the Q1, there would be the POCs and some of the lab trials that would be announced. That would be exciting. And also the other exciting news is about the hybrid modems that we're working with some of the chipset vendors. That would also be coming out sometime in Q1 and Q2 from our side.
Right. Okay. A coverage question. Do you expect NTN traffic to take some of the TN traffic, particularly in FWA scenario? Or do you think 5G/6G TN networks will be superior in urban and suburban areas? Who wants to take that?
I see Shiv, you're trying to talk. Sorry.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can hear me now. Third time lucky? No?
Not really.
We can hear you, but there's a static at the back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Give us your answer, Shiv, and let's see how bad it is.
All right. I apologize. But I think, look, there are certain situations or scenarios. If you think not just, okay, urban, suburban, no, my answer would be no. But perhaps going further out, or if you're looking at different topologies, yeah, if you're in a really remote area, on a hill, certain places, yes, I think I won't say taking over the traffic, but serving the need is going to happen. It's very possible to do that today. And you look at some of the, it's already happening in some areas. Think Pacific Islands and certain other places. So it's not unreasonable to think that while still, a relatively smaller piece of the overall sort of opportunity, there are certain scenarios in which it can certainly serve a need, relative to terrestrial networks, which are just, either prohibitively expensive to get there, or just not physically feasible even in certain cases.
Okay, well, a bit distorted, but I think we got it all. So thanks for your answer. And next question: where is 5G NR for NTN on the maturity curve today versus DVB S2X satellite waveforms?
So I think maybe I can take that. As we know, in the release 17, where they define, it's still not that efficient. But going forward in terms of the other releases coming up, some of these inefficiencies, I would say they're being addressed, and that's something which I mentioned earlier when I was talking about where we are with respect to the waveforms and everything else. So I think from the maturity perspective, from iDirect side of it, I think what we're trying to do is we're getting involved into the 3GPP group meetings and specifications, where we try to go and provide our insight, where we, especially on the physical layer aspect of it. But from the waveform itself, I would say, I think it's at least one more year away or 1 or 2 years away where it becomes a mature the way it has been. I mean, compared to the other waveforms, but that's where we would want to be ready, right? And then that's the reason why we're trying to build the platform and then the network itself, and then trying to create the ecosystem and the infrastructure. Once that becomes mature, then we would want to go ahead and then be ready for that to support.
Thank you. Okay, let's quickly move on. I think we've maybe got a couple more minutes, so let's see how many we can get through. Right now, NTN direct to cellular on consumer devices such as Apple is getting significant attention, but is the real opportunity from a revenue point of view to come from enterprise applications? Who wants to go?
This is an interesting topic, and direct to device has been in the news quite significantly. I think we all hope, or we all believe that the science could support it, that we can do more than just text or tracking from a direct to device perspective. If I look at the advancements over the last 2 years, there's quite significant improvements that we've seen, and there's a lot of investment going in there. I don't know if we're talking about enterprise, if we're talking about service level agreement, enterprise connectivity. I'm not sure that direct to device would be able to do that. But I think basic connectivity in terms of messaging and perhaps a call, depending on how many people are in a cell, I think that is probably very feasible. But that's my opinion. I think these engineers on this call would probably argue and say something's maybe different. But I don't think from an enterprise perspective there would be a significant opportunity, because we need to realize, even from a GSM perspective or cell coverage perspective, and we have cell towers on the ground, indoor coverage would be required for enterprise availability. So optimistic that we could get there, because things have changed so much over the last few years, but I don't think that that's plausible.
Okay, we've got one more question. Let's see if we can just well, I was going to say, can you answer this one briefly, but it's quite a big one, so maybe I'll just try and get like a soundbite from each of you. What do you see as the biggest challenge to overcome in realizing hybrid roaming with multiple operators, multiple orbits, TN, NTN, ubiquitous connectivity? Maybe I'll ask all three of you to answer that one very quickly. The biggest challenge facing this space.
I think maybe I can give one point from my side, and then I'll pass it on to Brian.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge is building the ecosystem and having this roaming agreements. I mean, for example, it is something which was done and very prominent when you go into the mobile network operator side of it, the telcos, where these agreements have been signed and they know exactly what it is. But now when we're trying to come into the SNOs and MNOs, that's something which, it's the first time, and then we need to figure out how exactly that needs to be done. I think from the technology perspective, I would not see that much of a challenge, because it's, we should be able to build that. But what it comes down to is the agreements that the two disparate, I would say, the networks and the operators coming together and understanding what exactly needs to be done. I think that is where I would see I would say, a lack of a better word, a heavy lifting that needs to be done.
Shiv?
Sure. I think he's covered quite a bit of it, but the one area which will probably lag a little bit is device support, just like literally in terms of how quickly the take up of, okay, you're going to have hybrid modems, you're going to have all of this, but that adoption rate, it's going to take some time before. So there's, you're going to have people who like some haves and have nots, and support from the device side is going to take some while to percolate. So even if the heavy lifting is done, all the agreements are done, it just, it takes a while before you have that device in your hand that can actually leverage all of this new capability. It's just one thing that I feel will probably lag a little bit relative to other things.
Great. And finally, Brian.
Yeah, I think these two gents have laid it out. I think technology won't be the inhibitor here. I think in terms of how we put those agreements together and how we commercialize it, I think that's probably going to be the tough part. So also having the devices available, but I definitely think it's going to be in these roaming agreements, and specifically the services that need to be delivered, the quality of service and how you segment and charge and handle the billing side of it. I think that's probably where the complication is going to lie. The technology is going to be the enabler, and I think the technology will prove itself, but the devil's in the details. So I think that's going to be on the paper exercise.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. We did have more questions. Just to let you know that iDirect will have kept a copy of all the questions that have been asked, and they'll do their best to answer those that we didn't have time for on the session privately after the event. It's been a fantastic introduction to a great topic. I'd like to thank the speakers for taking part, to Shravan, Brian and Shiv. Thanks for all your insights. Just a reminder that you'll be getting a link. Anyone who signed up for this session will be getting a link in the next few days so that they can watch again or share the video with colleagues who didn't get a chance to attend. And also that link should have a resources tab on where you can tap on there to access the slides that we saw today. So once again, thanks to our speakers. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to the dog.